Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Abil Qasim al-Mustafa Muhammad wa ala ahli baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to another Mizan Live session on Shia Imamiyya doctrine. Last week we put behind us a few articles. I think it was 2 or 3. Yes, article number 75 we put behind us last week. So we were talking about how a prophet, or our holy prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he can be proven to be a prophet. Number one was through, of course, his miracle, the Quran. We talked about that a few weeks ago. And then we talked about also how, just bringing together different pieces of evidence and proof, regarding different things, all of this coming together to also prove that he was a prophet and he was truthful in his claim. In addition to all of that, we also have, last week what we covered, which had to do with a previous prophet introducing the holy prophet as the one to come after him. We talked about that a little bit, and some of the observations or reservations, regarding that, how it is claimed that in the holy book of the Christian faith, they say that the holy prophet has been mentioned, that a Rasul will come min ba'di ismuhu Ahmad, that Prophet Isa told his people that someone's going to come after me by the name of Ahmad. We talked about that a little bit, and how when you look in the book of John, you find the term Parakletos, and what that translates to, and how at the end of the day it might be something that as Muslims we will see might have been that prophecy of Prophet Isa alayhi salam regarding our holy prophet coming after him. But at the same time, how we can't use this against the Christians today and say that, oh, you have it in your book, so you must believe, because they have another interpretation for this term, and there's some technical, linguistical, discussions there in regards to that term of parakletos, and how the exact form of that word is, and what the equivalent and translation of it is. In the Bible, of course, what you'll find as the translation for this term is the advocate, not the praised one, which translates to Al-Ahmad. So we have this discussion, we have this debate, it's ongoing, and of course, as I said last week as well, we can't really, use this as something against anyone who's not Muslim today who is a Christian and say, oh, your book talks about our prophet, so you must believe in him. No. The same way the Christians cannot use kalimatullah and the word of God that is used to describe Prophet Isa as a way of proving that Prophet Isa was God, all right, or he was the Word of God or a Son of God, the way we have in the Christian faith. The same way they can't use certain terms in our book, or Ruhul Qudus, for example, Holy Spirit. Okay, the term Holy Spirit is used in the Quran, but does it denote the same thing that the Christian faith understands from Holy Spirit? Not necessarily. And so this was the same way they can't use those against us, because we have our own understanding of these terms. We can't also use these terms against them in their book. Paraclete or Parakletos or whatever you want to call it and pronounce it is something that we can't use against them, it seems right now. But yes, a Muslim can say maybe that yeah, I believe that this was the actual prophecy of Prophet Isa alayhi salam. It was just altered and touched later, and so we can't use it anymore. Something like that maybe you can say. Anyway, we also talked about in Article 76, we talked about the different miracles of the Holy Prophet that have been mentioned in the Quran. There were some reservations there as well, while others were pretty good. So we talked about that a little bit, and then we moved on into how Article 77 talks about how the Holy Prophet's message and Islam is a universal one. It's not for a certain people, and the verses that supported that idea. Today we're going to start with Article 78 of the book of Doctrines of Shia Islam of Ayatollah Subhani, as you all know, that we've been working on in the past, 25 sessions we've had Article number 78 talks about something that today as Muslims we don't really have much of an issue with, but it is something that is disputed by others sometimes. And that is the idea of the Holy Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being the final messenger and the seal of prophets. This sealship of prophethood, if we're going to call it that, and being seal of prophets, where does that term come from? We're going to talk about that a little bit. And we're going to also talk about, just in general, how the Prophet is the seal of prophets and his message is the seal of all messages. No faith, no religion is going to be coming after the faith of Islam. Anything that comes after it is just, of course, according to the Shia school, is going to be related to imamah and not nubuwwah. Okay, so two things that we get, he says, out of the Prophet being seal of prophets. Number one, he says, after him, well, I don't know why the translation is not corresponding with the Farsi text I have here. You know what? I'll just explain off of the Farsi text. It says that from this seal, from the Holy Prophet being the seal of prophets, we get two things. Number one is that his sharia, his legal system that he came with, his faith and religion that he came with, is a nasikh, they call it, of all previous religions and faiths. In other words, once Islam comes through the Holy Prophet, then there will be all previous religions will be nullified and will not have credibility anymore. In the time of the Holy Prophet, when he comes with the message of Islam, you cannot remain Christian or Jew anymore if you know that his message is the true message. You have to convert and embrace that message of his. And previous religions will no longer hold. If someone still practices Christianity when the Holy Prophet has come with Islam, and they are convinced that he is the Holy Prophet, they can't remain Christian. Christianity will transform into Islam. Judaism will transform into Islam. As is the case that Judaism had to transform into Christianity when Prophet Isa came. So the same thing holds when Islam comes. Now, I'm going to be honest here. I don't know why Ayatollah Subhani, why he brings this up as one of the points we get out of him being the seal of prophets. The fact that previous religions are nullified. Because your religion doesn't have to be, as a prophet, your religion doesn't have to be the seal of religions for it to nullify previous religions. I hope that's clear. So, for example, if Prophet Isa, Prophet Jesus comes, alayhi salam, he's not going to have the final religion. The final religion is Islam, right? But in the time of Prophet Isa, alayhi salam, Judaism will be nullified. So, Christianity, if we're going to call it that faith, if we're going to call it that, of course, Islamically, Christianity, let's just call it Christianity. If Christianity comes, Christianity, we all know as Muslims, is not the final religion. So as a result, does it nullify previous religions like Judaism? It still will nullify them. So where does this idea come from? I don't know. I haven't figured it out myself yet why he says this. That since the Holy Prophet of Islam came and he's the final messenger with the final religion, all previous faiths are nullified. Same thing holds for Christianity. Same thing holds for Judaism. When Prophet Musa came, if there was religions before Prophet Musa that Allah had sent prophets for, those were also nullified. You can't follow Prophet Musa if you still belong to a faith before Prophet Musa. Prophet Musa came with a new book. He came with a new legal system. So that's the one that has to be followed now. Anyway, nonetheless, that's what he says. He says that's the first point we get. That the prophethood of the Holy Prophet nullifies all previous faiths, the religion of the final prophet, being Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, nullifies all previous faiths because it's the final faith or final religion. That's what he says. As I said, I don't get it. But anyway, number 2, second point we get out of Islam being the final religion and him being the final prophet is that, of course, there will be no more shari'ahs and no more religions and no more legal systems coming after him. And if anyone does make such a claim, it is rejected. Okay, so that's clearly something that we understand, that yes, that is what being the seal of prophets and the seal of religions means. Now he goes on to say that this is something we find in the Quran, this is something we find in hadiths, no problem there. And to be honest, yeah, everyone I think agrees with that in mainstream Islam, not even Sunni Shia things here. It's not a Sunni or Shia thing, just in general. Everyone agrees in Islam, or the mainstream of Islam believes that, yes, the Holy Prophet is the final faith. When I say mainstream, to be honest with you, that is not a very accurate way of saying it, because if someone believes that if someone that's Muslim believes that after our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, someone else came as prophet, they have probably left the fold of Islam. Yeah, there is no prophet after the Holy Prophet. So when I say mainstream, I'm loosely using that term because you can't be Muslim and believe that someone came as prophet after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I hope that's clear. Okay, so you said Quran and Hadith, Ayatollah Subhani. Show us. He says, Surah Ahzab, verse 40. ما كان محمد أبا أحد من رجالكم ولكن رسول الله وخاتم النبيين وكان الله بكل شيء عليما. It says that ما كان محمد, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa is not the father of any of your men, but he is the messenger of God and the khatam of all prophets. Khatam, we have to talk about that. The khatam of all prophets. What does khatam mean in Arabic? Khatam is used for ring. Okay, so if you want to say ring in Arabic, you say khatam. In classical, of course, Arabic. In colloquial Arabic, they'll say mihbas. But anyway, that's irrelevant right now. Khatam. So here it says he's the ring of prophets. Someone might say, well, what does that mean? Ring of prophets. And this is maybe where some people who have now their own cults and their own religions, this is where they might get it from. They might make this mistake and say, when it says ring, that means that he is the highest of all prophets, like a ring, yeah, on the finger of a person, yeah, that which gives value to a person. The bigger the diamond in the ring, the more valuable the person is, right? That's what they'll say. So when it says ring of prophets, that means, look, that's the most valuable of them all. But it doesn't mean that necessarily someone's coming after. This is what some people say. So what does mainstream Islam say here, or just Islam say here? They will tell you that when it says God, the Holy Prophet is the khatam of all messengers, the way we understand it today is different than what it was in the past, a little bit, of course. Still, it was used as an adornment, of course. But back in the day, people would use their rings for something that they don't use for it today. Back then, and that's why it's called khatam. Back then, a ring was used to do khatam of things, to seal things. The ring of a Khalifa, right? It was one of a kind, and he would, when he wanted to stamp letters, official documents, he would use his ring to stamp them. Right? He would probably dip it in something, in some ink or something, and then he would stamp that document. So back then it was that's why it was called khatam to begin with, because it's something ma yukhtamu bih, they say, that which is used to seal something else. Today no one uses their rings for that, really. Now maraji' of taqleed, they still, some of them at least as a formality, will have such a thing. Their rings will be their seal, and to sign letters they'll do that. Nowadays probably they'll have a rubber stamp that has the shape of a ring. Maraji' taqleed, that's what they might use. If you look at these receipts that are given in return for the monetary dues that people submit to the offices of the maraja. When they give you a receipt, it'll have like a little oval shape or maybe, square shaped stamp on it with the signature of that marja or the name of that marja inscribed in it. That is a khatam, ma yukhtamu bih, that which is used to seal other things. So if that is the meaning of khatam, when the Quran says that he is the ring of prophets, don't translate it as ring, rather translate it as seal of prophets, which I think most, if not all, Quranic translations, that's what they use. So for example, here it says, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not the father of any man amongst you, but he is the messenger of God and the seal of the prophets, it says. So usually in translations of Qur'ans, that is the term that will be used, seal. Why? Because although khatam is used for ring, but there's a literal meaning to it, which means that which is used to seal other things. Okay. He goes on to say, that's one verse of the Qur'an. And to be honest with you, brothers and sisters, you don't need more than one verse of the Qur'an. If you have one verse of the Qur'an regarding a subject or topic, that's all you need. You don't need 10 verses, right? So that verse is pretty clear in what it's trying to say. Hadith, he brings maybe one hadith, yeah. Although he says, because once again, brothers and sisters, this is not a theology book that we're going through. Yes, you will find tons and tons of theology in it. But in the end, it's not a detailed, comprehensive theological book where it wants to go through all the arguments for beliefs that we have in Islam and in the Shia faith. No. All he's trying to do is say, look, these are the beliefs of the Shia. And yes, he'll provide one or two verses or hadiths for it, but that's about it. And I think that's how he's supposed to do it, because in the beginning he told us that he's going to keep it concise. So he brings one hadith. He brings the hadith of Manzilah, it's called. It's a very, very famous hadith, and it's in both Shia and Sunni sources. And it can be used to prove that the Prophet is the last Prophet and seal of prophets. What is the story? The story has to do with the Battle of Tabuk. It's very famous. How Imam Ali wanted to go to battle with the Holy Prophet, but the Holy Prophet left him behind in Medina. Imam Ali was a little upset and worried. What's going on? Is it because I'm not good enough? Have I done something wrong that the Prophet is not taking me to the Battle of Tabuk? And the Holy Prophet turns to him and says, don't worry, O Ali, there's nothing wrong. أَلَا تَرْضَى أَن تَكُونَ مِنِّي بِمَنْزِلَةِ هَارُونَ مِن مُوسَى إِلَّا أَنَّهُ لَا نَبِيَّ بَعْدِي. That, O Ali, does it not make you happy to know that you, compared to me, are like Harun, the brother of Musa, compared to Prophet Musa alayhi salam? Prophet Harun was the one who would take the place of Prophet Musa alayhi salam wherever it was needed. So, O Ali, if I'm leaving you behind, and this is what the hadith is trying to say, if I'm leaving you behind, it's not because of a flaw in you. As a matter of fact, it's because you're so good that I'm leaving you behind as a person to replace me until I return. So this hadith is a very famous one, of course. The end part of it is what we're going to need here. He tells Ali alayhi salam that, look, you're sitting in my place just like Harun would sit in Prophet Musa's place. There's just one difference between you and Harun. Harun was a prophet, just like how Prophet Musa was a prophet. But I want you to know, if I'm a prophet, if Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a prophet, if you are the one to substitute me and replace me in my absence, you're not a prophet. That's the only difference between you and Harun. In other words, everything else is the same, except that you're not a prophet. إِلَّا أَنَّهُ لَا نَبِيَّ بَعْدِي. Except that, O Ali, there is no prophet after me. In other words, you might have this high status, but you're not a prophet. Why? Because there's no prophets to come after me. Finished. In other words, I am the final prophet. In other words, that prophethood is sealed through me and ends through me. This is what the Prophet tells Imam Ali alayhi salam. So this hadith, and the reason why he's chosen this hadith is because it is a mutawatir hadith according to him. a hadith that has been narrated so much that everyone knows that these words came out of the Prophet's mouth. Of course, in addition to this prophethood and seal of prophethood part, there's other parts of this hadith that the Shia also use for their particular beliefs about how Imam Ali has such a high status, about how he is to succeed the Prophet even after the Prophet passes away, not just in the Battle of Tabuk. But that's irrelevant to our discussion right now. Right now, Ayatollah Subhani is trying to draw a more general conclusion from this verse, and that is that the Holy Prophet is the seal of prophets. No prophet will come after him. Okay. Article number 79 talks about how Islam is an eternal religion. It will be there forever. What makes Islam such? What is so special about it that allows it to be a religion that will persist until the Day of Judgment and won't get old or obsolete and die out? This is a technical article, so I'm not going to explain it too much, and I'm going to kind of skip it. I'll just read the 4 or 5 points that he makes. Number 1, he says that the legal system of Islam is one that it has the most. He says it has the most comprehensive legal system. That's what he says here. Intellectual self-evidence in those legal areas where it has competence. Intellectual reasoning forms one of the means by which the obligations of man can be deduced throughout his life. Excuse me, I'm sorry. He says, first, this Sharia is the most complete plan for securing the natural and spiritual needs of man according to divine guidance. That's what he says. Okay. Number 1. Number 2, he explains, those of you who want, you can read. I'm not going to explain too much because, as I said, it's a little technical. He says, when it comes to the legal system of Islam, Islam has given general principles that can always be applicable in all times, in all eras and ages. Why is that the case? Number 1, intellectual self-evidence, he says. Number 2, how in Islam always the lesser harm or the lesser or the more important ruling will be given importance and precedence over the less important one. The one that has less harm will be given precedence over the one that has more harm. Things like that he mentions. I don't know why he goes into these details. Keeping open the door of ijtihad, he says. This is more something that to discuss maybe in a ijtihad course rather than here maybe, because you can mention these different items, but explaining them is going to get a little technical for people. And finally, secondary rulings, ahkam thanawiyya. How we have secondary rulings versus primary rulings and how they override those primary rulings. How secondary rulings override them. Anyway, as I said, that's technical. We're not going to get into that. Okay, so that's Article 79 regarding why Islam is a religion that shall persist forever, he says. Okay, let's move on to the next article, which is what he says Westerners now are saying about Islam, and that is how flowing, how easygoing, and how simple, basically it is. I'm going to read off of this. I'm not going to explain myself because there's a big quote he brings in here that we need to just read off of. He says, one of the special features of the Sharia of Islam is the simplicity and the balanced nature of its rulings, a feature which renders them easy to understand. It might be said that this feature is one of the most important factors in the penetration and spread of Islam among diverse peoples and nations of the world. I really have to agree with him on this one. It is the case, in my opinion, if Islam is allowed and given that room to actually spread its message and let the people know what's going on, I think it will take over. And I think that's why they are suppressing Islam wherever they can find it. And it's unfortunate, but this is the case. And whoever has control of mass media is the one who will control that narrative. So yes, I totally agree with what he's saying. Diverse people and nations of the world. As regards the worship, I mean, let me say one more thing before I go on. I understand that yes, the Christian faith is the most dominant faith right now across the globe. And second to it is probably Islam. But the thing is, we have to understand also is that, look, there are different reasons why a faith will grow so fast. First of all, it's obstacles, people. If there are obstacles, as I said, if they're getting in the way of and suppressing the message of Islam, reaching, not propagation of it, but just it reaching the people, if there are major hurdles, then yes, it won't become the fastest growing one. In addition to the fact that we are, in my opinion, one of, if not the most misrepresented faith on the face of the planet right now. And people with extreme ideologies, they're going out there. Some of this is even deliberately done to give Islam a bad name and defame it. So if that's the case, 1, obstacles and suppression. 2, misrepresentation. And then 3, let's talk about the message of Islam versus the message of Christianity. Once again, I can't stand it when people just bash other faiths, and that's not what I want to do. But let's look at it, I think, realistically here and see, what do we usually find with the Christian faith and the people who go out there, those who go out and propagate Christianity in different continents of the world, in Africa and in Asia and other places, not just this part of the world. What you find is, yes, what are the main themes? Love, forgiveness, believe in Christ, and the original sin is forgiven, so to speak, of course, and these types of things. Islam is not going to be as easygoing, of course, in that sense. Islam is going to say, hey, you have to pray, you have to fast, you have monetary dues, you have to abstain from certain things, etc., etc. So yeah, of course, I personally believe that if a faith is promoting, easiness and, more love versus responsibilities, then I think that will grow more. Plus, you don't have the obstacles there, you don't have the suppression there, you don't have that misrepresentation the way Islam has right now. You don't have it there. So I think all of these things come hand in hand. If it was a fair game, I think, Islam would spread much easier. Now, having said all of that, I also want to add this as well. I don't want to say the Christian faith has love, but Islam doesn't. That's why it's growing. No. The love that you have in the Christian faith is highlighted. Unfortunately, for some reason, the Muslims won't highlight the love in Islam as much as they should. Yeah, they'll highlight other things more. And so that might become a problem. So we have to understand that there are certain themes in Islam that we just haven't gotten out to the people yet properly. And as a result, others are using those themes in their narratives. Thus, their narratives are growing and developing more at a faster pace than our faith is growing and developing. And so that I have to say. Now, let's move on. Before I move on and continue reading, let me read this question by our brother here. He says, what about the many ahkam and rulings we have? Like some risalas have 3,000 rulings. Yeah. So, I'm just going to say this, that if you're going to have a problem with 3,000 rulings, you have to also remember that, now let's look at the Catholic faith. I want you to look up the Code of Canon Law of 1983. I want you to look that up. 1983, because I think that's the last edition of this Code of Canon Law. If you look at that up, you'll find maybe more than 3,000 little rulings and articles, you want to call it, of and tenets of the Catholic faith there as well. So what does this mean? When we say easygoing, when we say simplicity, yes, it's hard to learn the faith. Yeah, it's not easy to learn all the rulings, I understand. The thing is, though, they all fall under the categories of prayer, fasting, khums, zakat, these types of things. So we have 7 or 8 of the furu'ud din, 7, 8, 10, however many you want to count. that have to be, of course, adhered to, as is the case with other faiths as well. The Judaic faith, we're not even going to get into that because there are so many rulings there as well. So all of these Semitic, Abrahamic faiths, they have their set of rules. We have to understand that part. But the question is, can I live a normal life and still adhere to these rules? The answer is yes, you can. Prayer that we have, I mean, the Fajr prayer, you can do it in 3 minutes. Dhuhr and Asr prayer in 10 minutes maybe, depending on your speed, 5 minutes for some. Maghrib, Isha, same thing. So out of 1440 minutes in a day, if you multiply 24 by 60, and you get 1440 minutes, God is asking for 30 minutes in a day for prayer, maybe. At most, probably, for a normal person. You fast throughout the month, throughout Ramadan. I know it's not easy, but when Ramadan comes, after 1 or 2 days, people find it easier already to fast. And they go to work and all of that. Yes, I will admit that there are some exceptions to what I'm saying. Some people have hard jobs. But even there, Islam will say if you can't fast, you don't fast and you make it up later. Monetary dues. For example, let's talk about, the Shia madhab has khums. Khums is 1/5 of whatever is left over of money that you've spent for your life. It's not like taxes that we have in this part of the world, where you have to pay your taxes even if you have no money left. If you spent all of your money on things that you need for, your house, for your living and all that, still taxes will apply to you and you have to pay those taxes. But khums doesn't work like that. Khums says, hey, if you really need something in life, and need here, I'm using the word need loosely, we have to use it. Need meaning it's within your social status and your financial status to have a laptop like this, a car like that, a house like this. Islamically, mainstream Shi'i jurists will tell you, if you used up all your money on expenses that you have, when your date of khums comes, you don't owe anything. Whatever's left, 1/5 of it is owed and is due. Nothing else. But taxes don't work like that, right? So I'm just, explaining these things. But then there's more details of how to pay that khums, how to calculate it. So then there will be more details for that. But all in all, what I'm trying to say is you can live your life, according to the faith, and it won't be too problematic. And there will be always secondary rulings that will override the primary rulings. There will be loopholes that Islam has put for you to get out of certain situations, etc., etc., etc. Hope that answers your question. Okay, there's another question here, but I don't think it's relevant to our discussion, so inshallah we can discuss that some other time. All right, let me continue reading this now. That was a good question, by the way. We have 3,000 rulings in some risalas, so what do you say about that? Yeah, that's what I think. Okay, so now moving on, reading, he says, as regards the worship of God. So before this, I spent a lot of time discussing the answer to this question. So let me just go back a little bit. That one of the special features of the Sharia is the simplicity and balanced nature of its rulings. So then he goes on. He says, as regards the worship of God, Islam offers a pure and clear concept of divine unity, far removed from all ambiguity and sophistry. It's not sophisticated. Tawheed, he's saying, this is what he's saying. It's funny, I have to translate the English here because it's complicated. Sometimes it gets a little sophisticated. Tawheed of God, the oneness of God. He says it's a simple thing. And I think he's kind of alluding to the Trinity and how hard it is to understand the Trinity. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, 2 days ago, I had a meeting with a Sunni brother that, had embraced Islam, and he's a Caucasian, and he was talking about why he embraced Islam to begin with. I asked him, why did you embrace it? He said, you know what? It was the Trinity. That's what the deal breaker was for me. I just could not understand it. And it just didn't make logical sense to me. So I guess Ayatollah Subhani here is probably alluding to the fact that, look, our concept of God is not going to be a complicated one. It's very simple. And for that, you have Surah At-Tawheed, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Surah Ikhlas. He says when you look at Surah Ikhlas, it's very simple and easygoing. It's pretty straightforward. It says Surah At-Tawheed alone bears witness to the truth of this assertion, that it is just simple. The monotheism we believe in, the divine unity we believe in, it's very simple and straightforward. Likewise, he says, this sacred book places such emphasis on the principle of piety in its consideration of the spiritual rank and station of man, that it constitutes in itself a means of restoring to man all his most noble qualities, the nobility of man being brought to full fruition by his relationship with the divine. In the area of practical rulings, we see the way in which Islam prohibits all forms of hardship and injury. Indeed, the Prophet makes himself known as one who brings an easy law. So you're not supposed to go hard on yourself. As I said, if you're sick, you're not supposed to fast. If you can't stand in prayer, you sit in prayer. If you can't sit, you lie down. If you can't perform wudu, you do tayammum. So that's what is meant. Once you learn the rules, learning them might be hard, but the application of them is easygoing, he's saying. That's what he's trying to say. So yeah, you might have 3,000 rules in the Risala Amaliyah, the book of Islamic laws, but that's because 3,000 scenarios can come up. But the ruling corresponding to each of these scenarios, he's trying to say, is applicable, is practical, it's easygoing and straightforward. That's what he's saying. So I think that's the best answer I can give to that question, is that 3,000 rulings is because you can have 3,000 scenarios. But once you learn the ruling pertaining to your scenario, then it's easy. It's totally applicable, totally practical. Hopefully you're getting what I'm trying to say. I think it's pretty clear. Yeah, so he says the Prophet has made it clear in hadith that we have that he brings an easy law, not a hard one. It says, جِئْتُ بِشَرِيعَةٍ سَهْلَةٍ سَمْحَةٍ. I am coming with the easy-going religion. The easy and sahla meaning easy, tolerant meaning samha. It gets along with you. Oh, so this is your problem, this is the solution. You have this problem, then do things like this, and so on and so forth. So this is the part where he actually quotes Western scholars and what they say about Islam. I'm going to read this as well. It's nice. He says impartial and objective scholars, even amongst the non-Muslims, acknowledge that the most important factor in the rapid spread of Islam was the clarity and comprehensiveness of its guiding principles and its rulings. For example, the famous French scholar, now you're going to have to bear with me, I hope I read this correctly, but it's spelled Gustav Lebon, Gustave Le Bon. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if this is pronounced Gustave Le Bon or something, I don't know. Anyway, all I know is Le Bon sounds like LeBron. Okay, that was an NBA reference. Alright, whatever. So he says, Gustave Le Bon writes, the secret of the advance of Islam resides in its extreme simplicity and ease. Now when he says that, by the way, he doesn't mean just in its practical laws. We have to understand. In its understanding of God, the unity and monotheism of God, the oneness of God. Yeah, all of these things. So in the beliefs also, he says it's easy to understand. It's very simple. The secret of the advance of Islam resides in its extreme simplicity and ease. Islam is free of all those qualities which the healthy mind finds impossible to accept, and which other religions have in abundance. Interesting, he says that. You could not conceive of a religion with simpler principles than those of Islam, which assert God is one, all men are equal before God. By performing certain religious duties, man attains felicity in paradise, while violation of these duties leads to hell. The clarity and ease of Islam and its rulings considerably facilitated its progress throughout the world. More important, though, was that strong faith that Islam casts into the hearts of its adherents, a faith to which no doubt can have access. So he says this is also something. Islam, just as it is a religion most disposed to scientific discovery, is also the greatest of all religions in respect of building upon the foundations of the past and thereby fostering refinement of the soul and character of people. So that's what he says, and many more have said that too. And I personally, as impartial as I'm going to try to be, I say that I agree with this. Yes, it is very simple. You can compare Islam to the Christian faith and to the Judaic faith. With the Judaic faith, it's very complicated when it comes to the practical rules. Some of the prayers that they will have will take up to 45 minutes maybe, according to what you find out there. Now you can search this. I've heard this from, we've had rabbis visit us and speak to us and so on. But yeah, once again, that's something to look up. I'm not saying I'm necessarily right on this, but there will be very hard, if you're going to be an Orthodox Jew, there will be very hard rules that you have to abide by. And just recently, in the past couple of years, maybe I was reading online how some of them even will want to go into a plastic sack when they're on the plane if the plane is flying over a graveyard. That's very hard. And of course, airlines won't let that happen. Now, this might be super ultra orthodox Judaism. Maybe it's not a universally practiced tenet of the Judaic faith. But all I'm saying is that you'll have these things out there. Maybe they're mystics. Maybe this is not mainstream Judaism. I don't want to, once again, misrepresent another faith. That's not right. I disagree with that approach. But anyway, if you look through the rules of Judaism today, this is something that's pretty famous, that you will find very hard tenets in there. Number one. Number two, when it comes to the Christian faith, when it comes to the practical side of life, things will be easier. I agree. You don't have hijab, you don't have 1 month of fasting, you don't have prayer every day. You might have a weekly service in your local church. Things like that you will have. But when it comes to the theoretical side of things, and the belief system, you will find, yes, a lot of complications there. You will find things that are hard to defend. I will be very, once again, trying to be as impartial as I can. It is going to be hard to defend certain beliefs in that system. So, for example, the Trinity, of course, is a hard one to explain, and there are different explanations, but in the end, there are people who just give up because they can't understand it. There will be the idea of original sin, how Adam tainted his children and descendants, and how through baptism that stain is removed from us, and belief in Christ maybe is what lifts that off of us. That's something to look into, original sin. There will be a lot of other things, just the fact that the crucifixion is a way of our deliverance from that original sin. People will ask, why does God have to do something for us to be venerated, if that's the word, and to be off the hook, kind of, so to speak, of the original sin that we had? Now, of course, they will come back and they'll say, well, that is the grace of God, and that is God understanding that law and rulings will never be adhered to by mankind, so God has to intervene himself and make a great sacrifice, etc. So the list goes on, brothers and sisters. The list goes on when it comes to the beliefs of the Christian faith. I will have to say that it seems they are hard to sometimes defend philosophically. They're not very simple. While in Islam, the beliefs are simple, the practice is not 100% simple. You're not off the hook, but you can live a life. You can live a practically religious life, according to Islamic law, and it won't be too much of a problem. So that's what they're saying. The fact that it's like that this faith is such, is what makes it, a faith that has persisted and is spreading by the day. The next article, which I'm not going to get into actually, and I'm going to end a little sooner today because I want to start this topic next week from its beginning and not have to go back again and discuss things, is the alteration of the Quran. The Quran and being the miracle of the Holy Prophet and the most important part of the faith, which is really the backbone of Islam till today. We have to understand that this book, if it's going to be a book that can be altered like previous books, then we better figure out if it's going to be a book that can be altered, we better figure out how we're going to defend our faith. Because who are we kidding? Islam prides on the fact, it has pride in the fact that it has a book that has not been touched over the centuries. So we better figure out how we can prove that this book was not altered. In this Ayatollah Subhani's book, he's not going to get into the details of that, and I'll explain this more next week as well, inshallah. There are books and volumes of books on this. Yeah, and it falls under the Quranic sciences, they call it. But here, next week, he's going to give us a little taste of it, and he's going to talk about how we don't believe in the alteration of the Quran, and a little bit of the reasoning behind that as well. It'll be nice, I think, but that's going to be for next week, inshallah. So from next week, we will go and start from article number 80, I think it is. Yes, article 81, excuse me. Article 81 and the alteration of the Holy Quran. Until then, keep us in your du'as. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.